All right, well, if there are no questions, well, one question that you might have, or might have had, if you don't get homework yet, is on the what we were just starting to talk about last time, which is implicit premises, implicit or implied or missing. Now I think I gave a definition of it last time, so I'm going to give another one. Implicit, implied, missing. Implicit, implied, or missing premises. Well, let's say an implicit, implied, or missing premise is a premise that is needed before the premises, or what's needed to help the given premises. No, yeah, I should have thought this through. Is a premise that I'm going to keep it simple. Makes the argument, makes an invalid argument valid. Now, that's not very helpful yet because we haven't defined validity, which I will now do, because the concept of validity is perhaps the most central concept in this class. We will return to it again and again. Validity is a property of arguments, not of statements. Sometimes people use the word valid and they apply it to a statement. So that, like they would say, you made a valid point. If somebody says that to you, slap them, because they shouldn't. Well, it's okay outside of the context of a logic course, but in a logic course, validity is only a property of arguments. You have to, and to have an argument, you have to have at least two propositions, one premise and one conclusion. That's the very minimum. So validity is a property of the relationship between the propositions that make up an argument. So you can't have that relationship if you just have a single proposition. So you can't just have a valid point. What does it mean to say that an argument is valid? An argument is valid if and only if the premises guarantee the conclusion. Guarantee the conclusion. Premise or premises. Okay, now that's still not as informative as we might like, because we still have this term guarantee, and what that means is not entirely clear. We'll talk about that in a lot more detail in coming classes. But there is a test for validity, which again we'll talk about in a lot more detail, which is you imagine the premises are true. If the argument is valid, then if the premises were true, the conclusion would have to be true. Now, the tricky part about this is the premises don't actually have to be true for the argument to be valid. And the reason for this relates to a distinction I made last time. If you remember, I distinguished between the form of an argument and the content of an argument. The content of the argument is what it's actually about. And it's the content of the argument that affects whether or not the propositions are true in the real world. So, if I were to say, suppose I were to say this. If Elvis is alive, then the moon is made of green cheese. That's my first premise. Second premise, Elvis is alive. Conclusion, the moon is made of green cheese. Is that a valid argument? Yes, it is. It is a valid argument. Why? Because if the premises were true, if it was true that if Elvis is alive, then the moon is made of green cheese, and it was true that Elvis is alive, then that would guarantee that the moon is made of green cheese. Now, of course, the premises are not true, but that doesn't affect the form of the argument. The form of the argument has nothing to do with what the premises are actually about, it just has to do with the logical structure. Now, so far we've revealed the logical structure of arguments by using these diagrams involving arrows and pluses. We'll find out that there are other ways to reveal the logical structure later on. But the logical structure is what's important. And in that case, that is a valid argument. So, back to missing premises, or implicit or implied or whatever you want to call them. There are also assumptions. That is, they are claims, an assumption of an argument is a claim that you're relying on to make your argument work. But you haven't said it. Why haven't you said it? Well, you say because it's an assumption. We all assume it. There's no point in saying it. So, for example, if I were to say, I think this is an example from the book, Joe can't go skiing because he has a broken leg. What's the conclusion of that small argument? Joe can't go skiing. Okay, so if I were to diagram it, Joe can't go skiing is proposition number 1, Joe has a broken leg is proposition number 2, the conclusion is Joe can't go skiing, this is the premise. Simple diagram. Now, if I work out the structure of this, if I'm testing this, I would say, Joe can't go skiing. What's your evidence? Joe has a broken leg. Now, here's the test that reveals missing premises. You ask, because a missing premise will always go here. Missing premises are always dependent premises, okay? Because they are what the premise you have needs before it will guarantee the conclusion, and that's the definition of a dependent premise. And the way to find a dependent premise, or to test for a dependent premise, is to ask the magic question, so what? So the so what test should enable you to find a missing premise. So Joe can't go skiing. What's your evidence? He has a broken leg. So what? What's the answer?
You can't ski very well with a broken leg.
You can't ski with a broken leg, right? Now, there's a reason why nobody says that, is because it's freaking obvious, right? Which is why a lot of stuff goes unsaid. And often, the missing premise, you'll be saying, well, this is kind of obvious. That's fine. But it is still a very valuable skill to be able to find missing premises or assumptions, because sometimes it turns out that they're not actually true. And that somebody can have a weak argument that is weak in its unstated part. That everything that they've stated is actually a cast iron fact that they can prove. But the whole thing rests on this unstated claim. And if you say, well, wait a minute, everything you've said is all well and good, but it doesn't guarantee your conclusion unless we have this assumption, and it turns out that assumption is false. Well, that would undermine their whole argument. So it's, of course they want to not say it. They want to keep it hidden away. But that means it's your job to expose it. And, you know, in this case, is it universally true that you can't go skiing with a broken leg? People have played soccer, or football as it is called in the rest of the world, because you kick a ball with your foot. People have broken their necks in the middle of a game and continue to play. There was a famous goalkeeper who did that. He smacked his head into the goalpost and continued to play. Now that's tough. So you can play soccer with a broken neck, so I bet you can ski with a broken leg. You know, slap a cast on that baby, you're good to go. So there's an example where, you know, you would expose, you'd say, look, is Joe committed to skiing or not? Come on. Now that's a frivolous example, but other examples won't be as frivolous. But the important thing to note is that what you're doing in providing a missing premise is you're providing a link between the premise and the conclusion. Usually it'll be the case, as we've seen with dependent premises, that the premise alone is not directly relevant to the conclusion, and you need to provide that link, which is why the so what question, that connects the premise to the conclusion. But the other point to stress is it must guarantee the conclusion. It's not good enough that it makes it more likely. We're not in this class going to look at a very important type of argument called inductive arguments. Inductive arguments are arguments where the premises don't guarantee the conclusion, but they do make the conclusion more likely. So, 8 out of 10 dentists approve of this particular brand of toothpaste, so therefore my dentist will approve of it. That doesn't guarantee it, but it does make it more likely. Maybe your dentist is one of the 20%, but it seems to make it more likely. That would be an inductive argument. Now, it turns out that all inductive arguments are invalid, because the premises don't guarantee the conclusion. We're going to be looking in this class at what's called deductive arguments. And deductive arguments just care about validity. It's very black and white. Either the argument is valid or it's not. There's no gray area. So you have to be very careful. Do the premises plus the premise that you've supplied guarantee the conclusion? There will be some cases where it looks like they guarantee it, but it's not quite good enough. Now, we started doing the exercise on page 115.
I had the wrong setup. I brought the wrong one.
Pushing. All right, well, we're going to have to start with cat. Yeah, see, you always get me picked on because I pick on the extremes first. We did number 1. So I'll just redo number 1. Tom is a very successful salesman, so he must be an outgoing person. What's the conclusion? No, that's not the conclusion. The conclusion is Tom, we have to include that, must be an outgoing person, or Tom is an outgoing person. So we say that's proposition number 2, and we only have one other, so it goes like this. So to test our diagram, we say Tom is an outgoing person. What's your evidence? He's a successful salesman. And then we say, so what? And what is the answer to the so what question?
Salesmen are outgoing people.
Yeah, all salesmen are outgoing people. Now, that is the premise that you would need for the argument to work. And in fact, it's false, I'm sure. You can have successful salesmen who just send you spam all the time, right? And hide in a dark room somewhere and never talk to people. But that would be the missing premise. Now, I think we got as far as number 2, and I talked a little bit about it, but it's worth repeating. So number 2, I'm putting you off again, Kat. The doorbell just rang, someone must be at the door. What's the conclusion? Someone's at the door. What's your evidence? The doorbell just rang. So what? Now, I gave you 2 write all this again. I gave you 2 options for the missing premise. Now, this is worth noting for the homework. If you see one of the propositions that you think, oh yeah, that's the one, keep reading. Read all the options. Don't just say, well, the first one sounds good. I can't be bothered to read the other ones because I'm in a hurry because I left it till 9:50 before I started this. Read all the options because sometimes the questions are designed to trick you, because I'm a bastard. All right. Here are your 2 choices. The doorbell always rings when someone is at the door. Now, if you just read that far, you think that's the one. But there's also this option. The doorbell only rings when someone is at the door. Which is the correct one and why? Number 2. Why is that the correct one and not number 1?
It excludes any other reason the doorbell might ring.
So what? That's true, don't crack your knuckles, but so what?
That-
doorbell will not ring by itself, and sometimes someone will be at the door but will not ring the bell.
That's true. So remember what we're doing. We've heard the doorbell ring and we conclude someone's at the door. Which of these would guarantee that someone is at the door? Well, this one wouldn't guarantee it. Why not?
Because
Even if this
people
is true.
lock the door.
No, that doesn't show, because if this is true, they will always. It says they'll always. The doorbell always rings when someone's at the door.
Because
Could
of the
ring when
ring.
someone's not at you.
Right. Think of it this way. This is true. I always breathe when I'm teaching. It's true. It really helps. Because passing out just not so good pedagogically. But does that rule out me breathe? So suppose I would say I always breathe when I'm teaching. I'm breathing now, therefore I'm teaching. Is that a good argument? No. Because I breathe all the other times too. And that actually includes most of my life, thankfully. Right? Same here. The doorbell always rings when someone's at the door. The doorbell's ringing now. Does that prove that someone's at the door? Not, because this leaves open the possibility that it could ring at other times. Like, did I give you the example last time? I had a wireless doorbell for a while, and it rang every time the guy across the street opened his garage door. Turns out he did that a lot, so we got rid of that doorbell, right? Because it was just driving us crazy. So even though it was true that it always rang when someone was at the door, it rang at other times too. So this is the correct one, so you have to be careful. This is the only one that would guarantee that if the doorbell is ringing, then there is someone at the door. So be careful. Words matter. That is one thing you are learning in this class. Punctuation matters too, but words matter a lot. All right, Kat, final. Read number 3.
Cheating is dishonest and therefore wrong.
What is the conclusion?
Dishonesty is wrong.
No, that actually isn't stated. What is the conclusion? The conclusion will be there.
Cheating is dishonest.
No. What's the indicator word? Therefore. So whatever is after the indicator word is the conclusion. Well, not quite, because the only thing after the word therefore is wrong. But what is that an abbreviation for? Cheating is wrong. So the conclusion, which is not stated in full, you have to fill it in full, is cheating is wrong. So we say cheating is wrong. And then we say, what's your evidence? And what's the evidence given?
Cheating is dishonest.
Cheating is dishonest. Now normally we would say, fine. But there is actually an assumption there. What is the assumption? And it's the answer to the so what question. The answer is?
Dishonesty is wrong.
Dishonesty is wrong. And again, the reason why it's not stated is because it's freaking obvious. But still, you still need to be able to expose the assumptions. The next one I'm going to skip over. It's an example of, it actually is related to a very famous, well, it's a philosophical argument, so it's not famous. But amongst philosophers, it's famous. By my nomination for the greatest philosopher of all time, David Hume, that illustrates that in fact all the laws of nature, or the laws of physics, not a single one of them is proven. And they could all be broken tomorrow. Which is, I think you will agree, an interesting thing to prove. And this is relevant to that. But we don't want to get into that, so we're going to skip over that. Number 5, then, Karen.
Politicians who are convicted of crimes should not be returned to office, so Congressman Jones should not be reelected.
What's the conclusion?
Conclusion is that Congressman Jones should not be reelected.
Okay, and what's the missing premise then?
Congressman Jones has been convicted of some crime.
Yes, exactly. Because that's the missing link. Because Congressman Jones should not be re-elected. Why? Because politicians who've been convicted of crime should not be returned to office. But notice, that doesn't mention Congressman Jones. We have to supply the missing link that connects that fact to Congressman Jones. And it is obviously, the implication is Congressman Jones has been convicted of a crime. Oh, I love this one, because it's so old-fashioned. Jet, number 6.
The traditional wax record played on top-of-the-line equipment can reproduce the spatial features of music, such as the positions of the instruments in an orchestra. So in that respect, they're superior to most compact disc recordings.
These newfangled compact discs. Pa! What I like about this is it's not only old-fashioned because it's talking about records, but even records had not been made from wax for about 50 years. There is something called vinyl that doesn't actually melt, when it gets a little warm. Actually, sale of vinyl records has been going up in recent years because hipsters. Sale of vinyl records, inverse proportion to sale of razors. All right, so what is the missing premise? Well, let's work it out. What's the conclusion?
Traditional wax records are superior to most compact disc recordings.
Good. You filled in, you got rid of it to the traditional wax record. All right, so the traditional wax record is superior to most compact disc recordings. That actually was true in the early days of compact disc recordings because they were using crappy masters or something, but it's no longer true. Even analog enthusiasts probably have to admit that. What's your evidence? The evidence given is that the traditional wax record played on top-of-the-line equipment can reproduce the spatial features of music, such as the position of the instruments in an orchestra. Close your eyes and you're there. What's the missing premise? Notice the conclusion is records are superior to compact discs. What doesn't the premise mention? Doesn't mention compact discs. It just says what records can do. So for the conclusion that records are better than CDs to be true, what do you also need to know? Yes, you would have to know that CDs can't do that. Okay? So that's the missing premise. Compact discs can't do that. And of course that's actually false. Compact discs can do that. And I say that as someone who owns 2 turntables that actually work. All right. Number 7 and 8. Let's just do number 8. What?
There's another in 6, but it's blindingly obvious.
Another
implied premise.
What's that?
That being able to perform being able to reproduce spatial features of
Right.
music is superior.
Right. That's something that makes it superior. True. All right. Number 8. Josh.
The plays attributed to Shakespeare exhibit a profound intelligence, but Shakespeare himself never went to college, and therefore could not have been very intelligent. So someone else wrote his plays.
Now here, how many propositions have we got?
3, 4.
So let's say 1 is plays attributed to Shakespeare, plays blah 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 intelligence. Number 2 is Shakespeare never went to college. And I believe his parents were illiterate. I believe his wife or his daughter was also illiterate, which is, I think it's his daughter, which is kind of damning evidence. 3 is Shakespeare could not have been intelligent. Conclusion, Shakespeare did not write Shakespeare's plays. That sentence is actually a puzzle for philosophers of language. It makes perfect sense, but if you think about it, it should be a contradiction. Shakespeare didn't write those plays. Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare. Okay. Now, how do we diagram that? What's the conclusion? What's that? Chorus, please? 4. That was not a great chorus, but I'll take it. All right, now where did the rest go? we know Shakespeare didn't write his plays, according to this?
Because he wasn't very intelligent.
Because he wasn't very intelligent. So what? So that's number 3. So what?
Needs one.
His plays exhibit an intelligence. I mean, if they were a bunch of grunts, then you could have been a moron and written them. But the fact that they exhibit intelligence implies that you need to be intelligent to write them. So it looks like that. Where does 2 go?
That's what is 3.
Does that make sense? Because it's the evidence for him not being intelligent. What's your evidence that he's not intelligent? What's the answer? Didn't go to college. Didn't go to UM-Flint. Can't be intelligent. All right. Where do you think the most glaring missing premise is in this argument?
That intelligent, if you're not intelligent, you can't write plays.
Well,
Or
yeah, there is one here. You could say that you can't write things that exhibit intelligence without yourself being intelligent. There is that old line about, if you get an infinite number of monkeys and an infinite number of typewriters, they would produce the works of Shakespeare, just by randomly. But let's assume that that's very unlikely. I don't think that's the most glaring one. I think it is true that you would need, there is an assumption there, you can't produce plays that exhibit intelligence without being intelligent. That's true. But I don't think that's the most glaring one. There's certainly a more glaring one.
You
Yeah.
have to be intelligent, or you have to go to college to be intelligent.
You can only be intelligent if you go to college. Yes. So that would be where?
3 + 1
No.
is a 2.
Yes, if you go, so you say, he's a bit stupid. What's your evidence? He didn't go to college. So what? What's the answer? Only people who go to college are intelligent.
so what is that? Like, what number would that be?
Oh, we don't have to supply a number. We can say X.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you don't have to give a number. You just have to point out that that's where it would be, and that's what
Does
you
it
need.
also imply that the other person went to college? Would that be a missing premise?
I don't think you need that because we're not really specifying what the others are. We're just saying that the person. The implication is that the person who wrote them was intelligent. So yeah, we would be able to deduce that from this they would have had to have gone to college.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, you can be intelligent and not go to college. I think Bill Gates went to Harvard for 1 semester and then dropped out. And was just forgotten about after that. Who knows what happened to him? All right. Any more questions about missing premises? Otherwise, I want to move on to, skip a couple of chapters, move on to an area of logic that was of great interest to the ancient Greeks, and it follows almost automatically. If it was of interest to the ancient Greeks, it's going to be an interest to medieval philosophers, because medieval philosophers tended to just rework stuff that was done by the Greeks. That's a little unfair, but certainly they were very influenced by the ancient Greeks. They just added God. And that is the study of, first, chapter 8 is going to be categorical propositions, and then chapter 9 is going to be arguments involving categorical propositions. So, this is a particular kind of proposition. Now, it seems, that there are lots of kinds of proposition. There are conjunctions, for example, as a kind of proposition. That would be a proposition that contains the word and or an equivalent to and. But we don't have an entire chapter on conjunctions because they're not that logically interesting. But it turns out there are an awful lot of interesting logical facts about categorical propositions. And I think it was an assumption of the ancient Greeks, specifically Aristotle, who basically is the guy who kicked off logic, that most propositions can be stated as categorical propositions. We don't think that anymore, but certainly a large chunk of propositions are categorical. Okay. What is the number one most important fact about propositions.
They should be true.
Yes, they have truth value. They are statements that are either true or false. That's what makes for a proposition, something with truth value. Okay, so what's a categorical proposition? Well, it turns out, I'll start with an example. All frogs are green. Who knows who Kermit is? Does anyone not know who Kermit is? Good, no one has been so hideously deprived as that. Well, Kermit, you may not know, if you know the more modern version of him, he had a big hit with a song called It's Not That Easy Being Green, or it was just called Being Green. Who is familiar with this song? Good. Did you know that it was covered by Frank Sinatra once?
I did not.
There you go. It's an odd song. It doesn't seem to really work as a song, but for some reason it was a big success. And I have a tape of this for my kids, honestly, that has a little preamble before it, where he says, I'm a frog, and frogs are green, so therefore I'm green, which is an example of what we would call a categorical syllogism, which is a two-premise argument involving categorical propositions. So I always use it as an example. This is an example of a categorical proposition. Why? Well, all categorical propositions have this feature. They feature two terms. Now, what are terms? Terms are categories of things. Categories, hence the name categorical propositions. What are the two groups of things in this case? Yes?
You have your premises and your subjects.
Well, wait a minute. You can't have a plural premise because, remember, a premise is a proposition. You would have to have an argument to have a premise. This is not an argument because it is a single proposition. So no premise is involved here. Now, specific to this example, what are the two groups in this sentence? Yes?
Frogs and green things.
Frogs and green things. Yes, that's good. I'm going to insist that when you put categorical propositions into what is called standard form, and I'll say more about that in a second, the predicate must be a class of things. And I will illustrate this by saying, imagine saying, here's a bag of blank. And if it makes sense, then it's okay. And if it doesn't make sense, then you need to do something about it. So if I just left it like this, I would say, here's a bag of green, which sounds kind of gross. Sounds like you've sneezed in a bag. What you need to say is green things. Okay, so those are the two groups, the two categories of things that are in all categorical propositions. These are the examples in this one. And we have a different name for each of these, which again should make sense for those of you who learned grammar. What two elements does every sentence have that you learned very early on? Subject and predicate. Well, we call this the subject term because it's what the proposition is about. That's what subjects are. And we call this the predicate term. Now, predicate in logic sometimes means property. And it's often true, although we've turned it into a class of things, in this case, green was a property. So it was saying, this proposition had truth value, could be true or false, because it was saying something about something. It was saying about frogs that they have this property. And that could be true or it could be false. So it's the having of a subject and predicate that allowed this proposition to have truth value and therefore be a proposition. All right, so that's one feature of categorical propositions. They have these two categories. But they have two other features too. All categorical propositions have quantity. Now, quantity is how many members of the subject class we're talking about. Now I'm going to abbreviate subject by S and predicate by P. Okay? So how many members of S, the categorical proposition, I'm going to abbreviate that as CP, I'm getting lazy here. How many members of S the CP is talking about? Now you might think that the quantity could be infinite then. You could be talking about an infinite number of things. You could be talking about a billion, you could be talking about a trillion, you could be talking about 37, you could be talking about 73. Sounds like you have an infinite degree of quantities, but the ancient Greeks simplified it down to 2, which I think is a lot less than infinite. And the 2 possibilities of quantity are all. You could either be talking about all members of the subject class or less than that. Or fewer than all, I suppose I should say. Fewer members than all. That's it. Those are your 2 possibilities. Either you're talking about all or you're talking about not all. What is a word that captures a quantity that is not all? Some. So basically all or some. Those are the 2 possibilities for the quantity of a categorical proposition. Now the other feature that categorical propositions have is quality. And qualities, like quantities, come in 2 flavors. Affirmative or negative. Depending on whether or not you're saying affirmative says members of S of a certain quantity are members of P. Negative says members of S of a certain quantity are not members of P. All right, so those are the features. 2 terms, a quantity and a quality. Turns out there are 4 possible types of categorical proposition. 4 types of categorical proposition. There's this row is where you're talking about all. We call that the universal. If you're on the top row, you are a universal categorical proposition. For the ones where you're not talking about all, we call that particular. So if you're in the bottom row, you are the quantity is particular. Okay, so this axis is the quantity. This axis is the quality. So if you're in this column, you're affirmative. I don't know why I'm writing, because my handwriting is so poorly you can't even read it. But it's just so you have some marker to remember the words that I said. And this is negative. There, I'll try a little harder this time. All right. Where do you think this one falls? Universal affirmative, universal negative, particular affirmative, or particular negative?
Universal affirmative.
It's universal because of the word all, and it's affirmative because it's saying all frogs are, rather than all frogs are not. Okay, now we could abbreviate universal, or we could illustrate the form of categorical propositions by just taking away the content. The content is what this is actually about. Frogs and green things illustrates the content of this categorical proposition, what it's actually about. Let's take that away and we're left with all S are P. And that's the way to write a universal, that's the way to write the form of a universal affirmative categorical proposition. Okay? All S are P. How would you write a particular affirmative? Some S are P. There you go. How would you write a particular negative categorical proposition? Some S are not P. Good. Now, at the moment, you just have to bear with me. Because this kind of stuff, we're just classifying types of categorical proposition, and it's not immediately clear the point of this. The point is that it turns out there are interesting logical relationships amongst these types. And we'll get to that in a bit. But for now, we're just doing what seems like busy work, learning how to classify types of proposition. But hey, that's all biology is. So, logic can't be worse than that. Using the same line of thought, what, and assuming you haven't looked at your book, so don't look at your book, what do you think the universal negative would look like? All S are not P. Yes, that would make sense, wouldn't it? So we're not going to do that. No, the reason why we would say that if we could, but unfortunately, it turns out that in English, all S are not P is ambiguous. It can mean what we want it to mean. What we want it to mean is that every single member of the subject class is not a member of the predicate class. That's what we want it to mean. But unfortunately, there is a way of using it which makes it sound like some members of the subject class are members of the predicate class. Imagine you're about to marry a lawyer, and I say, yeah, all lawyers are not dishonest. What do I appear to be saying? What it certainly seems to be an implication of what I'm saying. All lawyers are not dishonest.
Sounds like you're kind of saying that some or most lawyers are dishonest.
Yes. Right? Have you heard that used that way? All Chevys are not death traps, you know. That, I shouldn't say that in Flint of all places. All Fords, there you go, I'm allowed to say that. All Fords are not death traps. Who knows the story of the Ford Pinto? What's the story?
They had a gas tank in the back, and when you got rear-ended, it caused the car to explode.
Right. A minor design flaw, you might think. They're the ones used in all action movies where, you know, the tiniest bump causes a fireball. And the shocking thing, of course, was that Ford knew about this years in advance and suppressed it and kept selling them. And they made a calculation. They figure, well, eventually people are going to work this out and they'll sue us, but if we sell them for long enough, we'll have made enough money to cover it. So they made a calculation that a few dead people was worth it. That's car companies for you. What's that?
They paid people to do exactly that calculation.
Yeah, that's true. Well, so now when we hear about General Motors and the ignition key, that's minor in comparison. Okay, so the trouble is all S are not P sounds like it means something that we don't want it to mean. Whereas there is a phrase in English that is unambiguous, and that is no S are P. That makes it clear that not a single member of S is also a member of the predicate class. The disadvantage of this is now we're introducing a third quantity word, and also we're not including the quality. This word here, or pair of words here, is called the copula. Why? Because it joins two things together, which is where we get the word copulate. But unfortunately, it would be nice if in both negative ones it was are not. But unfortunately, here this looks like it's an affirmative one because the copula is affirmative, but the negativity is now built into the quantity word. So it's kind of unfortunate that we have to do that, but we do it, and that's the way it's done. All right, so you can't just look at the copula and work out whether or not it's affirmative or negative. So those are the four types of categorical proposition. And one more classification fact. We abbreviate these types using the vowels, A, E, I, and O. So an A-type categorical proposition is universal affirmative. An E-type is universal negative, an O-type is particular affirmative, and an O-type is particular negative. Okay? Why do they do this? Well, apparently it's because the Latin for I affirm is affirmo, and the first vowel, two vowels of that are A and I. And the Latin for I negate is nego, and the first two vowels for that are E and O. Who cares? Just remember the vowels, all right? Okay. Let's see if we can identify categorical propositions. Turn to page 199. Ethan, I believe we got as far as you. Could you read the first one, please?
Some baseball players are not golfers.
Give me a vowel.
Well, some. I'm sorry, that's not a vowel at all.
That is not a vowel. It contained a
I
vowel.
was thinking noun.
It contained actually the right vowel.
I would say that that's O.
And you would be correct. Because it's particular because of the word some, and it's negative because of the word not. So what is the predicate class in that case?
Predicate class is. Yeah, what a predicate class is.
It's P.
Golfers. Oh, the predicate class that are not golfers.
No, golfers. You're right. Now, so the predicate class is golfers, not golfers, because the not is not included in the predicate class. The not is outside of the predicate class. The predicate class is whatever goes where P is, which is after the word not. So what's the subject class?
Baseball players.
That's right. Okay, who's next? Done.
All graduate students are scholars. A.
Very good. Number 3. Chris is not here. Hunter.
Some movie stars are good actors.
George Clooney.
E.
Why would you say that? Why would you make me cry like that, Hunter?
Never mind.
Remember, it starts with the word some, so that tells you it's particular. So that tells you it's I or O.
I.
Why is it I?
Some movie stars are good actors. It has some.
So it's I or O,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have the word not, so it's I. You are correct. What is the predicate class in that case, Hunter?
Actors.
No. What is the predicate class? Good actors, right? You got to include everything that's part of the predicate class. It's not saying that some movie stars are actors, it's saying that some movie stars are good actors. Harder to beat. Number 4. Brandon.
Do you oh wait, no.
It's Brandon, sorry. Yes, it is O. Some movie stars are not good actors. Alright, Brandy. I see the confusion. Number 5.
No, self-respecting person is a snob. E.
Okay, and what is the subject class?
Self-respecting person.
Yeah, I'm going to say make it plural because it's a class of things. So it'd be self-respecting people. Yeah. Alright, those are easy. Let's skip ahead to, sorry Zainab, we're going to make it harder just for you, is page 202. Now it turns out that, just to make things interesting, all of the ones you were doing in the previous exercise were in what is called standard form. That is, standard form is looking like this. That is, beginning with the word all, some, or no, and no other word, and having the verb be are, and having the predicate class be a class of things. That's what it is to be in a standard form. However, you can convey the information of one of these 4 in non-standard ways. And so what you have to get good at is converting the non-standard ones into one of the 4 standard forms. And that's what we're going to do now. So, number 1 is fairly easy. You only have to make one minor change. Zaina. What is the type for the first one? A. All human beings are rational. What is the one alteration you have to make? Put that in. What's that? As it's written, it's not quite in standard form. In fact, you should be reminded of the one we started out with, because I had to make one minor change to that. Yes, that's right. In other words, because the predicate class, if I were to ask you what the predicate class as written, it's rational. And that's not a group of things. You know, you can't say, here's a big bag of rational, right? You have to add the word things. In other words, if it's just an adjective, as rational is, you have to turn it into a class of things. No, don't, things is fine. In fact, always use the word things. Don't get fancy with your noun. Just use things. Okay.
What did she say? I didn't hear what she said.
All human beings are rational things. That's the one change you have to make. It's an A type.
Why can't it be?
Rational humans?
Yeah, why can't it be rational people?
Because that's kind of cheating. We want to be making a claim that could be... It should be the case that this is possibly false, that you're saying something that is genuinely informative. But if I said all human beings, well, no, it would be informative because it's rational humans. But we don't want. It's just.
Just don't do it.
I don't want to just say that because that's not very informative. But I'll say something that's almost as bad, which is why will become clear later. It's what you tell your kids, and they hate you for it. The reason why will become clear later, but don't import, certainly do not import the noun from the subject class. Don't take, oh, the subject class is human beings, so take human beings and plug that into, don't do that. Just use things. Things is simple. Let's keep it simple. Now, it can sound stupid, but that's okay. Logic doesn't care about sounding stupid, it just cares about being clear. All right. Number 2. Jacob.
Term is I, and
You mean the type is I?
the type, sorry.
Yes.
The type is I, and some skiers are things who are out of control.
Yes. So you turn the predicate class into a class of things. All right, number 3. Who's back there? Samantha.
Nobody's perfect.
Ain't it the truth? Now, what type is that, first of all? E. Yes. Do you need glasses? Because you kind of look like you're squinting there. It is E. Okay, so if it is E, then it will be this. It will be no, and then the subject class. What is the subject class in this case? No. Don't say body, because it's not actually talking about bodies. Yeah, or the plural being people. So the subject class here is kind of unstated. It's people, but it certainly is what we're talking about. So no, people are perfect things. Yes. So it's no, people are perfect things. Again, it doesn't sound half as nice as nobody's perfect, but it is logically clear, and that's what we care about. Number 4. Yes, Philip. Read that out first.
A family that plays together stays together.
Or they just get mad at each other, depending on how bad they are at losing. We had to lose to our kid at board games for the longest time. Now, this starts with the word a. And the word a is tricky because you can have some propositions that start with the word a that are particular. For example, if I were to say, I talk a lot about whales in this class. I don't know why. I like whales. Whales are cool. Apparently, whale poop will save the oceans because it has some bacteria in it that eat the kind of algae that's, making the world poisonous. So more whales. Whales are good. Here's an example of a categorical proposition. A whale beached itself today in San Francisco Bay. What type is that? A, E, I, or O? It is I. Now notice I says some whales, and you think, but he just said a whale. That's okay, because we're not, are we talking about all whales? No. Well, in that case, we're talking about some. Some can be any number from 1 to 1 fewer than all. Okay? So if I said a whale beached itself today in San Francisco Bay, it would be an I type. However, what if I were to say a whale is a mammal? What type is that? It's A. But it's singular. I just said a whale is. Why is that talking about all whales? Well, I know, but I just said a whale is a
You're
mammal.
not talking about specific whale.
Right. Why not?
It's implied that you're talking about, like you're using one whale as like sort of the template for the rest of them.
Yes, I'm talking about, so in that case I'm talking about a generic whale. So think of both of those sentences. After the first one, it might make sense to say, oh no, was it Keiko? Right? Because I love Keiko. Is Keiko still alive? Keiko was in SeaWorld or Willie. Willie was freed, so it'd be tragic if he was beached later. You know, it would make sense to ask that question about the whale that was beached. But, you know, if I said, a whale is a mammal, was it Keiko? That's the wrong kind of question to ask, because when you say a whale, you're not really talking about any specific whale. You're talking about what you might call a generic whale. What does the word generic mean?
Run-of-the-mill sort of whale.
A run-of-the-mill. Joe Public whale, right? Joe Six-Pack whale. That's right. That is a whale that could be a generic, whatever we're talking about, in this case whale, is something that is not distinctive in any way. So anything true of that particular example will be true of all of them. So it just happens to be true that in English, and probably some other languages too, you can make general claims that appear to be singular claims, because you're talking about a generic example. So a whale is a mammal means really any whale is a mammal, which means all whales are mammals. So, long story short, the word a doesn't tell you the quantity. You have to kind of work out the quantity. What do you work out the quantity is in this case, Philip? Universal or particular?
I'm leaning towards universal.
Are you going to go all the way? Are you going to commit?
I don't like doing that very much.
Well, you have to. You're forced to.
Okay, universal.
And universal it is. That's right. Good job. Why? Why is universal the right answer?
Because it's talking about like a generic family.
In other words, you're saying that any family that does this.
Yeah.
Now, all right, here's another hard question. What is the subject class here? All what?
Families that play together?
Yes, not just families. We're not making a general claim about all families. We're making a general claim about all families that play together. All right, so that's the subject class. So this is an A type. All families that play together are, what's the predicate?
Families that stay
Now,
together. No.
Things that stay together.
things that stay together, yes. I know that sounds stupid, but too bad. I'm going to force you to be stupid. Logic is a special kind of stupid. No, let's skip over number 5. It's boring. Number 6. Jordan.
John F. Kennedy was not successful in his casting plays.
Policy, yes. What is different about that example from all the ones we've been doing?
It's about a specific person.
It's about one individual and one specific individual. Now, we've had examples that were about one non-specific individual, like a whale beaching itself in San Francisco Bay, but we haven't had an example about a specific, in this case, a proper name. John F. Kennedy. What number president was he? I don't have to know that. It's not my president. You don't know what number president. So what number president are we on? What is Barack Obama?
43rd.
Now, is he 43rd and 42nd?
No, he's just the 43rd.
Okay, so it's not in terms of terms. So work backwards and you can probably work out Kennedy. While you're doing that, there are two ways we could treat this. We could treat this as particular, because after all it's one, or we could treat it as universal. Which do you think we should? Universal, you are right. Why?
Because it's everything that he did. Like, we're only talking about him as a specific person.
Yes, our subject class is John F. Kennedy. How many John F. Kennedys are there? One. How many of them are we talking about? One. We're talking about all one of him. So it is a universal claim. That's right. So when you're talking about a class of one, it's going to be universal because you're talking about the whole one. So now we have to ask, is it A or E? A little voice in your head just said that. Yes, it is E. Well, there are two ways you could go. The subject class is John F. Kennedy. You could say all John F. Kennedys are things that are unsuccessful in their foreign policy. That would be an A type. Where the predicate class would be things that are unsuccessful. Or you could say that it's an E type because you could say no, John F. Kennedy was a thing that was successful. Which is the right way? Well, the right way is to, if there is negativity, it should be exposed in the quality. It shouldn't be used to define the term. So if I said things that are unsuccessful, I'm building in the negativity into my description of a class. That's not usually a good thing to do. I mean, it's just not informative. Like, suppose I were to tell you, I'm thinking of a class of things. And you say, well, what are you thinking of? And I said, things that are not chairs. Right? That's just not informative. Your class of things should always be defined positively, except in cases where that's impossible because they're essentially negative. But in most cases, the negativity shouldn't be built into the definition of the term. It should be out in the open. It should be exposed in the quality. So this is an E type. And if you said it in standard form, it would be no, John F. Kennedys are
Successful in domestic policy.
things that are successful in domestic policy. Yes. How are we doing time? Oh, yeah. Blessed are the meek. Eric.
I'd say it's
An A type. Who agrees? Come on, shall we go? Yes. Okay. So all what? Eric. What's that?
Blessed.
So you say the subject is what?
Blessed.
First of all, blessed is an adjective. So that cannot be, here's a big bag of blessed.
And it's saying like blessed people.
Well,
That'd be something.
it would be blessed things.
Pardon me.
And what's wrong with saying blessed things is the subject? What's the mistake there?
Blessed describes the meek.
So, in other words, if I were to ask you, Eric, what is this sentence about? Or who is this sentence about?
Me.
The meek. And if it's about them, they are the subject. So what's tricky about this sentence?
The subject is at the end.
The subject is the end. The order has been switched. Who would do such a diabolical thing? Well, where does this come from?
The Bible.
The Bible. Be more specific.
Book of...
Oh, you are getting specific. I was going to say, which testament, first of all?
Yeah.
There's only two. New. The New Testament. All right, what part of the New Testament? See, this is what happens when you separate church and state. I had to learn this in school. We have required religious education. It's the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount.
So
Actually, I know this.
Mark and Matthew.
All right, you're getting into way more detail than I know. No, actually, the main reason I know this is because of Monty Python's Life of Brian. That I will give examples from Monty Python because this is actually required if you're English. But Monty Python is like a famous group of comedians that came out in the late 60s, early 70s. They produced a bunch of movies. Their most popular over here, for some reason, is Holy Grail. But I think their best movie is The Life of Brian. It was more controversial because it has Jesus in it. And people thought that they were mocking Jesus. But as they said in a series of interviews, no, we're not mocking Jesus. What they were mocking was organized religion, which of course pisses a lot of people off too. But the only time Jesus appears in the movie is he's off in the distance giving the Sermon on the Mount, which is famous for blessed are the meek. For they shall have the earth for their possession or something. And the joke in the movie is the people are far away and they can't quite hear what he's saying. And they say, what does he say? Blessed are the cheesemakers? And then they try to make sense. Why would he say the cheesemakers? There must be something in this. Yes, this is from the Sermon on the Mount. And actually, you were to say it was from, even if you were to say it was from whatever specific book it's from, you still have to make one more qualification. It's from which version of the Bible?
The English version?
Yes, a particularly famous English version.
James.
The King James Bible, which is called the King James Bible because it was ordered by King James, who became king in 1601, when Shakespeare was still living and writing. And actually Shakespeare does a similar thing. It is a poetic way of speaking from the 17th century. We don't do that anymore, unless we want to sound like punters. You don't flip this around, but it is a poetic way of speaking. It turns out, actually, people love the King James Bible because this sounds cool. It sounds cool, it sounds very poetic. But actually the King James Bible, if you want strict accuracy to the original text as we know, King James Bible is pretty crappy. They were working from a not very good translation of a translation of a translation, and there's a ton of errors in it. But people love it because it sounds awesome. It sounds like Shakespeare. And in fact, the people who were hired by King James to do this translation weren't particularly good translators, but they were good writers. So they came up with wonderful phrases. And our language is peppered with phrases from the King James Bible that we don't even know. There's all kinds of phrases that are used in everyday English that come directly from the King James Bible. So it's great. But it does this thing. Blessed are the meek. If you were to put this in standard form, it's an A type, so we would say all meek things
are blessed. Are blessed.
Things, yes. So you have to do things twice in this case. That's right. Or you could say all the meek are blessed things. All right. Number 8, not so much fun, but we'll do it anyway. Destiny.
The political party that wins a presidential election can expect to lose
Congressional seats. About to happen. You will see this principle confirmed later this year. Okay, what type is that? A, E, I, or O? Are we making a general claim, or are we talking about a particular instance? So it's just true of some political parties that win a presidential election? Oh, okay, so what type is it? A type. So all, what's the subject class? Is it just political parties? Are we talking? Yes. So the subject class is political parties that win a presidential election. All of them are. What am I going to object to about that?
No noun.
There's no noun. So here's a big bag of expected to lose, right? You have to say what word? Things. That's right. All political parties that win on a presidential election are things that can expect to lose congressional seats 2 years later. All right. Let's leave it at that for now. We'll do more examples maybe next time. But I see on the syllabus that I'm covering the square of opposition. So I'm going to have to sprint through that. There are 4 types of categorical propositions. If you write them at the corners, you've got yourself a square. This is called the square of opposition. And it turns out that now the categorization system starts to pay off, because it emerges that there are some interesting, well, I'm going to say they're interesting, logical relationships that go on amongst members of this square. One of these, you should be familiar with this, is contradiction. Contradictions or contradictories. Let's say 2 propositions are contradictories. Let's say contradictories, that's what I should say. Contradictories. What does it mean to say 2 propositions are contradictory? Yes?
You can't have all S.
Don't give examples.
They can't be true at the same time.
They can't be true at the same time.
In
Say
the same
more.
respect.
And, well, let's say if two propositions are contradictory and I know one of them is true, what do I know about the other one?
Just false.
It's false. And what if I know the first one is false? It's true. So they can't both be false either. So you might just say they must have opposite truth values. Now, A types have a contradictory that is one of the other three. Guess which one without looking? E. E looks like a good candidate. So for example, if I say that all whales are mammals is true, what do I know about the statement no whales are mammals? It's false. But that's not enough. So they can't, we've shown that they can't both be true, but that's not enough. It has to be impossible for them both to be false. But think of this example. Is it true that all cats are cute? No. Even I, lover of cats that I am, I have to say there are some butt ugly cats, right? I hate the ones without fur. Mr. Bigglesworth, for example, if you've seen the Austin Powers movies. So it is not, it is false that all cats are cute. What is the truth value of no cats are cute?
Also false.
It is also false, because there are plenty of cute cats. Just look at the internet, if you can get past the pornography. So they are both false. What does that prove? They are not contradictory. So the contradictory of A is not E. What is the contradictory of A?
O.
It is O. If it is, what is the way to prove it false that all swans are white?
There are like swans.
You just need to how many non-white swans do you have to find? Just one. So to prove an A-type false, you just need to prove an O-type true. They are contradictories. And it works this way as well. So these are contradictories. Which tells you if you know the truth value of this one, you automatically know the truth value of this one. Okay? Which is good, because what we're trying to do in logic is we're trying to find out what you can deduce from what you already know. Logic will teach you new stuff on the basis of what you already know. That's how Sherlock Holmes works. Okay, so contradictories. Now, there are three other relationships that I'm going to zip through in double quick time. The next one is called contraries. Now, contraries is simply can't both be true, but all other combinations are possible. So in other words, they can't both be true. You can't have true, true, but you can have true, false, you can have false, true, and you can have false, false. You just can't have true, true. We should already know what two are contraries, A and E. Because we established that they can't both be true, but then we gave an example where they can both be false. So they can't be contradictories, but they can be contraries. Now we can have a case where they're both false, as in all cats are cute is false and no cats are cute is false. We can have a case where one is true and the other is false. All whales are mammals is true, no whales are mammals is false. We could have it the other way around. All whales are reptiles is false, no whales are reptiles is true. So all those are possible. What you can't have is all whales are mammals true at the same time, no whales are mammals is true. All right. Now I'm going to be lazy, but you can't because you don't have chalk. Subcontraries can't both be false, but all other possibilities are there. Guess which two are subcontraries? And the name kind of gives it away. What's that?
I and O.
I and O. Yes, it's underneath the contraries. So those are subcontraries. They can both be true, like some cats are cute and some cats are not cute. Those are both true. So they can both be true, they just can't both be false. If you know that it's false that some cats are cute, you know that the other one, it must be true that some cats are not cute. Or whatever. Finally, there is this relationship. It is different from all the others. Just look at it and you can tell me the difference. Look at my diagram. What is the difference? It only goes one way. So O is the this is subalternate. O is the subalternate of E, because the one that is on the bottom is the sub. E is not the subalternate of O. There is no name for the relationship between E and O. O is the subalternate of E, but not vice versa. Subalternate. Here's what subalternate does. If the universal is true, the particular is true. If it's true that all whales are mammals, it must be true that some whales are mammals. Again, sometimes we think, well, if you say some whales are mammals, you're kind of implying that some whales are not mammals. But don't think of it this way. Suppose I give you a bag of marbles and you take one out and it's white. Would you know that all marbles in the bag are white?
No.
Would you know that some marbles in the bag are white? Yes. Would you know that some marbles in the bag are not white? No, you wouldn't. You would just know that some marbles in the bag are white. Okay. If I tell you all marbles are in the bag are white, would you know that there's at least one? Yes. Okay, so if the top one is true, the bottom one is true. Suppose the top one is false. Did I tell you the bottom one is false? No, it's false that no cats are cute, but it's true that some cats are not cute. Okay, but if the bottom one, if the particular is false, what do you know? Why? Exactly. Because if this is true, this would have to be true. So if this isn't true, then this one can't be true. Because if it was true, this would be true. Right. Okay, so the universal is false. And now you can go. And don't forget, your homework is due by tomorrow at 10. Go away and do it there before you forget.